1 Timothy, we have two of the offices of the church that help us understand how to do that. We talked quite a bit last week about eldership in the church and what is required of elders in the church. And this week we get started on deacons. This is a different word, different office in the church. And just as we started our study of elders with an overview of what an elder is, if you can recall last week we had to talk about what elder, overseer, pastor, shepherd, this language in the New Testament, how it's used. We want to start today with an overview of what a deacon is. The English word deacon is not, in fact, an English word. There are words that we bring in from other languages. We call them a loan word because we don't translate the word. We just bring it straight in. So like, for example, sometimes you'll say, oh, that was a faux pas. Okay, that's not English. Have you ever tried? Can anyone spell faux pas? It's like F-A-U-X-P. Yeah, okay, nerds. Cool. Just have it on lock. You're just ready to go. But anyway, it's French, right? It's not English. And deacon's the same way. It's not a translation of a word. It's just taking a Greek word and putting it in English letters. The Greek word, we'd say it like this, diakonos. Okay, diakonos. Now, what is a diakonos? Well, it can be translated, if we were to put it in an English word, it's something like servant or minister. But when we say minister there's some baggage, because when we think minister, a lot of times we're thinking an evangelical, like church, like pastor. Sometimes we use minister and pastor interchangeably. That's not what we mean by minister here. The idea of minister here would be in the sense of an administrator, a person who administrates or stewards a given resource. Okay? So a diakonos is a servant or maybe an administrator who is put in charge as a steward of a certain part of the church, and they discharge the duties of that area. So we can see this pictured in Acts chapter 6. Now the word deacon, diakonos, is not used in this passage, but a very similar word is. Acts chapter 6 and verse 1. In these days, in the early church, when the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint by the Hellenists, that is, Greek-speaking Jews, arose against the Hebrew-speaking Jews, because their widows, the Hellenist widows, were being neglected in the daily distribution. Now, the word distribution there is diakonia. Okay, very close word. And it distribution or administration. And so the 12 summoned the full number of the disciples, and they said, it's not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve, and there's the verb diakoneo, tables. Therefore, brothers, pick out from among you 7 men of good repute, full of spirit and of wisdom, whom we will appoint to this duty. So what you have in the church there's a particular area of need in the church and a particular resource. The early church had a whole bunch of people who joined the church who didn't live in Jerusalem. If you can recall, the early church began on Pentecost. And this was a time of the year when the city of Jerusalem swelled in population to 3 times its normal population. So there are thousands upon thousands of people visiting Jerusalem who don't live there and don't have jobs there. And then a bunch of those people hear about this Jesus being preached by this guy Peter. And they become Christians. And now they're like, well, we're staying in Jerusalem with all of the Christians. But these people don't have jobs or houses or any source of sustenance or income. And so the church and that's why you see in Acts chapter 2, people start selling properties so that they can provide for this huge number of people, many of whom don't have anything to contribute materially. Now this ends disastrously, by the way, because later you see that there's a famine in all the world, and it's especially devastating to the church in Jerusalem. Why? Because they adopted an economically unviable model, right? Turns out some folks needed to have jobs. But anyway, they're rationing food to take care of all these people. And there's a problem in how that's being administered and how it's being distributed. And so they appoint 7 men to serve. Now these people, it translates, they're served tables. It's not like these 7 men are themselves literally going around and putting the food on every person's plate. By conservative estimates, by Acts 6, the church is maybe 20,000 people strong. So 7 people are not handing out food to that long of a line. So instead, it's like they're set to administrate this resource and to get this particular task done so that the apostles can do what? Preach and pray. And the apostles say, we are going to tend to the ministry of the word and prayer. So the point is, while there are different roles, there's the need in the church for some people to serve by managing or administrating a certain resource. The same idea of service is also found in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 and verse 4 and 5, Paul says, there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of diakonia, service, but the same Lord. So the point there is that there are many areas of particular service within the church, but we all have the same boss. Yeah? And so the idea here of specific service in the church, this is how deacons are differentiated from elders. So we talked about last week, elders or overseers are tasked with the shepherding oversight over an entire local church. Yes? What are deacons? Well, deacons are tasked with managing a particular area within a local church. So elders have a shepherding spiritual oversight, which is why they do teaching, which is why they have the authority to command right doctrine. And elders have that responsibility over the whole church. Deacons are responsible for discharging a certain duty or managing the team that discharges that duty over a particular area in the church. So examples in our church of particular areas of service would be things like benevolence. We have a fund. Many people don't know this in our church. We have a fund in our church that exists exactly for the purpose of blessing people in need, particularly members of our church who have some kind of financial crisis situation that comes up. And so one of the deacon roles would be somebody who oversees that fund. We might have, for example, several deacons who have charge of the maintenance and care of our building and our grounds, our physical assets. The coordination of congregational support. The early church, one of the roles of the deacons was to coordinate the church's care for widows in the church. Oversight of Sunday morning volunteer teams. We have people that greet folks, that greet people at the door, that help people find seats, that have the welcome desk. We have safety team members, and we have a role in our church of overseeing that team. We have our kitchen, and then we have kind of the finance of our church. So all of these are just specific areas of our church where we need people to serve by administrating an area or resource. Are you tracking?